The missing children passed through that door.
The first scream did not come from a child, it came from a grown man. Baba Sadiq, one of the strongest farmers in the village, staggered backward like something had slapped him. His eyes were wide, his hands shook so badly the cup in his hand fell and shattered on the restaurant floor. Every spoon stopped moving, every mouth stopped chewing. The whole place went quiet, so quiet that you could hear the rain tapping the zinc roof like tiny fingers. And at the center of it all stood a young lady nobody knew. She was slim, calm, and neat, with a small brown bag across her shoulder and a scarf tied softly around her hair. Her face was not angry. It was worse than angry. It was serious. The young lady's name was Damilola, but in that moment nobody cared what her name was. Because she had just pointed at the back door of Madame Faith's restaurant and said, clearly, loudly, "The missing children passed through that door." A few people laughed at first, not because it was funny, but because it sounded impossible. Madame Faith? The kind woman? The woman who fed hungry children for free? The woman who hugged crying mothers? People looked at Madame Faith like they expected her to laugh too, like she would wave her hand and say, stop that joke." But Madame Faith did not laugh, her smile stayed on her face, yet somehow it looked stiff, like a mask that was trying not to slip, and then, very slowly, Madame Faith reached under her counter. Not for a spoon, not for a bowl, for something else. Damilola's eyes followed the movement, and her voice became sharper. "Don't touch that," she warned. "Everybody, please, nobody should eat anything again." The room filled with confusion and fear. "What is she saying?" someone whispered. "She's mad," another person muttered. But Baba Sadiq wasn't looking at Damilola anymore. He was staring at the back door, staring like he had just remembered something he had tried hard to forget. Then he spoke in a dry voice, almost like he was talking to himself. "Last month, I saw a small slipper near that door." A woman covered her mouth. "Which slipper?" Baba Sadiq swallowed hard. "The red one. The one Auntie Nkiru's son wore the day he disappeared." The restaurant began to spin with panic. Chairs scraped back. Mothers grabbed their children close. Men stood up like they were ready to fight. Madame Faith's restaurant, the village's favorite place, had suddenly become the scariest place. And Damilola, the stranger, took one step toward the back door. Madame Faith's voice finally came out, soft, sweet, almost loving. "My dear, why are you saying all this?" Damilola didn't blink. "Because I came to find the truth," she said, "and I did." Madame Faith's smile twitched, and in that moment the back door, behind the curtain, made a small sound. A tap, 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 like someone was knocking from the inside. Everyone froze, because the back room was supposed to be locked. Empty, quiet, so why was something knocking? Damilola reached for the curtain. Madame Faith moved fast, too fast for a woman everybody believed was gentle. "Stop," she snapped. And the whole village finally understood something terrifying. Madame Faith was not begging, she was warning. And the rain outside suddenly felt louder. And before fear entered that restaurant, before the knocking, before the stranger came, Madame Faith was the pride of Oke-Oba village. Oke-Oba was a small village in Nigeria, surrounded by trees and brown roads that turned muddy when it rained. People there knew each other well. If you coughed in your house, your neighbor could ask you later, "Are you feeling okay?" That was how close the village was, and in the center of the village was Madame Faith's restaurant. It wasn't big. It was built with blocks, painted cream, with 2 wide windows and a signboard that read, "Faith's Place, hot food, warm heart." Children loved that place, farmers loved it too. Even travelers passing through would stop and say, "Let me taste the food of this kind woman people talk about." Madame Faith would smile, serve them, and say, "You're welcome. You're safe here." She was not young, but she was not old either. She was the kind of woman with soft eyes and gentle hands. Her voice was low and calm, and she always tied her wrapper neatly, like a woman who liked order. The village loved her for one main reason. She was kind. If a child came with no money, she would still give that child food. If a poor farmer came after a hard day, she would add extra meat to his plate and say, "Go and rest. Tomorrow will be better." And if a mother cried because life was hard, Madame Faith would hold her hands and say, "You will not cry forever." People began to call her Mother of the Village. But there was one thing everyone whispered about, even if they tried to be polite. Madame Faith had no children. Some said she tried and tried. Some said it was not her fault. Some said it was God's plan, but no matter what the reason was, it was a soft wound in her life, and many people knew not to touch it. Many people, but not everyone. Mama Precious was loud, proud, and quick to talk. She sold pepper and tomatoes in the village market. Her voice could travel farther than a whistle. She had one daughter, Precious, who was about 12. Precious was small, quiet, and very polite. Unlike her mother, one hot afternoon, Precious came to Madame Faith's restaurant to buy food. Madame Faith smiled at her like she always did. "Precious, my dear," she said, "help me take this small nylon to Mama Ijoma's house. I will add extra rice for you." Precious nodded quickly. "Yes, Ma." She took the nylon and ran off. Madame Faith turned back to her cooking. She didn't know that Mama Precious had followed her daughter. Mama Precious walked into the restaurant like a storm. People turned to look. The restaurant was full of customers eating. Madame Faith wiped her hands and smiled politely. "Mama Precious, you're welcome," she said. Mama Precious didn't greet her. Instead, she pointed a finger at Madame Faith like she was accusing her of a crime. "Why are you sending my daughter up and down?" she shouted. Madame Faith's smile stayed. "I only asked her to help with a small errand. I even promised extra food." "Extra food?" Mama Precious laughed loudly, the kind of laugh that was meant to shame. "Is it food that will give her future?" People began to whisper. Madame Faith's eyes softened. "Please, calm down. Precious is a good child, and I only—" Mama Precious stepped closer. Then she said the sentence that made the whole restaurant feel cold, even though the sun was hot outside. "You like calling children close because you don't have your own," she said. "You're using other people's children to cover your shame." The whole place went silent. A spoon dropped. Someone coughed. A child stopped chewing. Madame Faith didn't move. Her eyes stayed on Mama Precious, but they looked far away, like she had gone somewhere inside herself. Mama Precious was not done. "Look at you," she continued, voice rising, "always smiling, always acting like your Mother Teresa. But where are your children? Where?" Some people tried to stop her. "Mama Precious, enough." You've said it." But Mama Precious was enjoying the attention. She laughed again and said, "If I was childless like you, I would hide my face, not be running a restaurant to be collecting children like puppies." That word, childless, hung in the air like smoke. Madame Faith's lips parted slightly. Her hands trembled just a little. Then quietly, she said, "Mama Precious, please." Her voice was soft. Too soft. Mama Precious clicked her tongue. "Please what? Truth is truth." Then Mama Precious turned and stormed out of the restaurant. Precious came back later and found the restaurant tense. She looked confused. Madame Faith still gave her the extra rice, still smiled, still spoke kindly. But something had changed. Not on the outside, on the inside. After that day, Madame Faith became even sweeter. If you thought she was kind before, she became kinder. If she used to give one child free food, she started feeding 5. And if she used to help one poor family, she started helping many. She began giving children small gifts, biscuits, sweets, little notebooks. She would call them close and say, "My child, you are special." People admired her more than ever. "Mama Faith is an angel," they said. "Mama Faith has a heart of gold." Even Mama Precious, after a while, began to enjoy the benefits. Sometimes Madame Faith would send food to her house and say, "Tell Mama Precious I greet her." Mama Precious would collect it and say, "At least she knows I'm right." The village moved on. But then, children started to disappear. At first, it was one child, a small boy who went to fetch water and never returned. His mother cried until her eyes swelled. The whole village searched. They found nothing. Then it happened again. A girl who went to buy salt, gone. Then another. Not every week, not every day. Just slowly, quietly. Like someone was picking fruits from a tree, one by one, so nobody would notice the tree was getting empty. Fear grew in the village like weeds. Parents stopped letting their children walk alone. Mothers called their kids inside before
This can't be
sunset.
happening.
Men held
We
meetings
must be
under the big
strong.
mango
How
tree.
could this happen?
They blamed strangers. They blamed travelers. They blamed bad people from outside. But no one blamed Madame Faith, because to them she was a blessing, and blessings they believed could not be dangerous. On a rainy afternoon, when the road was wet and the sky looked grey, a young lady arrived in Okeoba. She didn't come with noise. She didn't come asking for attention. She came quietly. She greeted elders respectfully. She listened more than she spoke. And she asked one question that made people uncomfortable. Where do the missing children disappear from the most? People shrugged. Anywhere. Market. Road. River path. But Damilola didn't accept that. She walked around. She observed. She watched patterns. And very soon she noticed something strange. Whenever a child disappeared, the family would later say things like, "He ate at Madame Faith's place that day." She gave her biscuit that morning. She called him close and rubbed his head. Small details, easy to ignore, but Damilola did not ignore them. She also noticed something else. Madame Faith cooked late at night. Not like normal cooking, not like, "Oh, let me prepare for tomorrow." This one was different. There was always smoke behind the restaurant, a faint smell that didn't feel like normal food. And the back door, always locked. Always, even when the main restaurant was full. Damilola started to visit the restaurant often. She bought small food. She sat quietly. She watched. And she saw what others refused to see. Madame Faith was kind to everyone. But when children came close, her eyes would change for a second. Just 1 second. Like a candle flickering. Then the sweetness would return. One evening, Damilola sat near the window and watched Madame Faith take a small plate to the back. A child followed her, laughing, trusting, and the back door closed. Damilola got up immediately. But before she could reach the door, Madame Faith came out again, alone, smiling, wiping her hands. The child did not come back out. Damilola's heart beat hard. She stood there, staring. Madame Faith looked at her and smiled even wider. "My dear," Madame Faith said softly, "are you okay? You look pale." Damilola forced a small smile. "I'm fine," she lied, but inside her she was not fine at all, because she was starting to understand something terrible. And she knew one thing for sure. If she was right, then the village was not just facing a mystery. The village was eating inside the house of the truth. That was why Damilola stood inside the restaurant that rainy day and pointed at the back door. That was why she said the missing children passed through that door. And that was why her voice did not shake, because she had been watching, collecting small clues, waiting for the right moment. But she did not expect the knocking. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came again, now louder. People stepped back in fear. A mother screamed and pulled her child close. A man shouted, "Open it!" Madame Faith's face tightened. Her sweet voice returned, but it was not calm anymore. "Everybody should stop this nonsense," she said, but Damilola moved forward anyway and grabbed the curtain. Madame Faith lunged. Her hand shot out and grabbed Damilola's wrist. Hard, too hard for a kind woman. Their eyes locked. Damilola whispered, "So you really don't want this door opened?" Madame Faith's smile disappeared completely, and in its place was something Damilola had not seen before. A cold, empty look. Then Madame Faith said very quietly, so only Damilola could hear, "If you open that door, you will not leave this village." Damilola's chest went tight. The restaurant felt like it stopped breathing. And behind the door, maybe the knocking turned into something worse. A faint, thin sound, like someone trying to call for help. Damilola's fingers tightened on the curtain. The villagers stepped closer. And just as Damilola pulled the curtain aside, Madame Faith reached under the counter again and brought out what she had been hiding. And the entire restaurant gasped, because it wasn't a spoon. It wasn't a knife for cooking. It was something that made people stumble back in fear. And Damilola realized she had pushed the truth to the edge. But the truth was about to push back. For 1 long second, nobody moved. The rain hit the roof harder, the knocking behind the back door stopped, and Madame Faith stood there with her hand raised. What she was holding was not a cooking spoon. It was a long metal rod, heavy and thick. The kind used to lock gates from the inside, not something you keep under a restaurant counter, not something you smile with. Gasps filled the room. "Mama Faith," someone whispered, confused and scared. Damilola did not step back. Her heart was racing, but her feet stayed firm on the ground. "You don't need that," Damilola said calmly, even though her voice shook a little. "If there's nothing to hide, let us open the door." Madame Faith's face was no longer sweet, her lips pressed tight. Her eyes looked sharp, almost angry. "I said," she replied slowly, "there is nothing inside." Then she took 1 step forward, but this time Baba Sadiq stepped in between them. "No," he said firmly, "the door will open." The villagers were no longer laughing, they were no longer confused, they were afraid, and fear makes people brave. Two men moved toward the back door. Madame Faith shouted, "Don't touch it!" But they ignored her. One man pulled the curtain aside, the other grabbed the handle. The door was locked from the outside. They looked back at Madame Faith. "Where is the key?" Baba Sadiq asked. Madame Faith said nothing. Her silence was louder than any scream. The man tried to force the door open. It didn't move. "Break it," someone shouted, and in seconds 3 strong men were pushing against it. Wood cracked, the lock snapped, the door burst open, and what they saw made several people scream. The room inside was dark, too dark. There were sacks on the floor, big cooking pots, and in one corner, a small shape moved. A child, a little boy, sat on the floor, tied with rope around his hands. His mouth was covered with cloth. His eyes were wide with fear. It was Chidi, the boy who had gone missing 2 days ago. His mother let out a loud cry and rushed forward. "Chidi!" she screamed. The men untied him quickly. He was shaking, hungry, weak, alive. But behind him, something else stood. Another door. A smaller wooden door inside the back room. Locked. and from behind that second door came a faint sound, a small whimper. The villagers stared in horror. "How many?" a woman whispered. "How many are inside?" Madame Faith dropped the metal rod. It hit the floor with a loud clang. Her breathing became fast. "This is not what you think," she said quickly. "I was protecting them." "From what?" Damilola asked sharply. Madame Faith's eyes darted around the room. "They were going to be taken," she said. I saved them." But her words didn't match what everyone was seeing. Ropes, locked doors, children tied in darkness. That was not protection. That was prison. Baba Sadiq kicked open the second door, and when it opened, the entire village broke down. 3 more children were inside, curled together, hungry, crying softly. They had been missing for weeks. Mothers fell to their knees, men covered their faces, children clung to their parents, and in the middle of it all stood Madame Faith, the woman they had trusted with their lives, the woman they called mother. Damilola looked at her carefully. "You were not feeding them," she said quietly. "You were keeping them." Madame Faith's body trembled. "No," she shouted suddenly, "you don't understand." But nobody was listening anymore. Because the truth had stepped out of the dark room, and it could not go back inside. The village in shock. The children were carried outside into the rain. People didn't care about getting wet. They just wanted air. They wanted light. They wanted to breathe again. Mama Precious was there too. Her daughter Precious was safe beside her, but her face had turned pale. She remembered the day she insulted Madame Faith, the words she had shouted, "You don't have your own." She suddenly felt cold. What had those words planted? Damilola stood in the rain, watching the scene carefully. Something still didn't sit right. There were 4 children rescued, but 6 had gone missing. 2 were still unaccounted for. She turned back toward the restaurant. Madame Faith was sitting on the floor now, her back against the counter. She was not crying. She was not shouting. She was staring at nothing, like someone who had been caught after running for a long time. "Where are the other 2?" Damilola asked softly. Madame Faith didn't respond. "Where are they?" Baba Sadiq demanded. Silence. The rain slowed. The sky felt heavy, and then Madame Faith finally spoke. "They're not here." The words chilled everyone. "Where?" Damilola asked. Madame Faith slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were not soft anymore. They were tired, broken. "They're already gone." A scream tore through the crowd. One mother fainted. "Gone?" What did that mean? "Gone where?" Damilola stepped closer. "Gone where?" she repeated. Madame Faith gave a strange, hollow smile. "You all loved me," she said quietly. "You called me mother. But you laughed at me too." Mama Precious began to cry loudly. "I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it." Madame Faith ignored her. "I wanted to know how it felt," she continued, "to have children around me, to hear them call me Mama." "You tied them," Damilola said. "I kept them safe," Madame Faith shouted suddenly. "Safer than this world would?" The villagers stepped back. This was not the woman they knew. Or maybe it was, and they had just refused to see it. While everyone focused on Madame Faith, Damilola walked back into the restaurant. She looked around carefully. The pots, the sacks, the floor. She bent down and touched the ground near the stove. It felt recently scrubbed. Too clean. She followed her eyes to the back of the room. Near the wall was something small, a child's bracelet, broken. She picked it up, and it belonged to one of the missing children. But that child was not among the rescued 4. Her heart dropped. She stepped outside again. "Madame Faith," she said firmly, holding up the bracelet, "this does not belong to any of the children we found." Madame Faith's face twitched. The villagers noticed. "Where are they?" Damilola pressed. Madame Faith closed her eyes. For a moment it looked like she might speak, like she might confess everything. But then, from the road outside the restaurant, a motorcycle engine roared loudly. Everyone turned. A strange man sat on the bike, helmet on his head. He looked at the crowd, at Madame Faith, and for one split second, Madame Faith looked at him, not in fear, not in surprise, but in recognition. Damilola saw it, the silent exchange, the understanding between them. Before anyone could react, the man turned the bike and sped away. "Stop him!" Baba Sadiq shouted. But it was too late. The motorcycle disappeared into the muddy road. Damilola's stomach tightened. This was bigger than Madame Faith, much bigger. She turned slowly back to Madame Faith. "You're not working alone," she said. Madame Faith's lips trembled, and this time, for the first time, fear entered her eyes. Because the secret was no longer safe, and neither was she. The message on Damilola's phone glowed in the dark. "Leave Oke-Oba now, or you will disappear like the rest." Her fingers felt cold. Slowly she lifted her head. Across the muddy road, under the weak yellow light of a broken street lamp, Someone stood, tall, still, watching her. The person did not move, did not wave, did not speak, just stood there. And rainwater dripped from the edge of the restaurant roof. The rescued children were being carried home. Mothers were crying, men were arguing about what to do with Madame Faith. But in that quiet second, it felt like Damilola was alone. Alone with the watcher. Her heart beat hard in her chest. She took one step forward. The figure stepped back, then turned, and disappeared into the darkness between the trees. Damilola swallowed. This was no longer just about a broken restaurant. This was bigger, and someone did not want her here. The village divided by mourning, the whole village was in chaos. Madame Faith had been locked inside the small community hall overnight. 2 strong men guarded the door. Some people wanted to hand her over to the police immediately. Others were still in shock. How could she? A woman kept asking. She fed my children. She prayed with us. She cried with us. Mama Precious sat outside her house, staring at nothing. Her daughter, Precious, held her hand tightly. I'm sorry, Mama Precious whispered over and over, but her apology could not turn back time. The rescued children were weak but alive. They told similar stories. Madame Faith had called them inside the back room. She had given them juice. Then she had locked the door. They said she sometimes spoke to someone on the phone late at night, someone she called brother. Damilola listened carefully to each child. Did you ever see the man? She asked gently. One boy nodded slowly. He came at night, he said. He brought big sacks. What was inside the sacks? Damilola asked. The boy shook his head. I don't know. But Madame Faith was scared of him. That was new. Scared. So maybe Madame Faith was not the top of this darkness. Maybe she was only one part. Damilola stepped outside again. She needed to think. The sun was rising slowly. Birds were singing. The village looked normal again, but nothing was normal. 2 children were still missing, and someone had threatened her. She pulled out her phone again. The number that sent the message was unknown. No name, no picture. But when she checked something small, something others would ignore, her stomach tightened. The signal had come from inside the village, not from outside. Whoever sent the message was close. Very close. That afternoon, Damilola walked around the back of the restaurant again. The back room had been emptied. The pots were still there. The ropes lay on the ground like snakes. She looked carefully at the floor. Mud, scratches, drag marks. She followed the marks outside. Behind the restaurant was a narrow path leading into the bush. It was not a common path. Most villagers used the main road, but this one looked recently used. Branches bent, footprints pressed into soft earth. Damilola followed it quietly, her breath slow, her eyes sharp. After about 10 minutes, she saw something that made her stop. A small broken toy truck. She recognized it. It belonged to one of the missing boys. Her heart dropped. She moved forward carefully. The path ended near an old abandoned building. It used to be a storage place for farm tools years ago. Now it stood empty. Or so people thought. The door was slightly open. Damilola froze. She could hear something. A faint sound, like a cough. She stepped closer. Her phone vibrated suddenly in her hand. She almost screamed. Another message. You should have left. Her hands trembled. Slowly she looked around. Was someone watching her right now? She turned back toward the building. The cough came again, very soft. A child's cough. Her fear fought with her courage. Then she whispered to herself, if I walk away now, they stay inside. She pushed the door open slowly. The smell hit her first. Damp wood, dust, and something else. Inside the building were old boxes stacked to one side, and in the far corner, 2 small figures huddled together, thin, dirty, scared, the missing children. They were alive. But weak, Damilola rushed toward them. It's okay, she whispered. I'm here. One child began to cry softly. Guys, we thought nobody would find us, the girl said in a shaky voice. Damilola felt tears fill her eyes, but she forced herself to stay strong. Who brought you here? She asked gently. The children looked at each other, then the boy answered. The man with the helmet. Her heart skipped. The one who came to the restaurant? She asked. They nodded. He said Madame Faith would take care of us, the girl added. That sentence burned, so Madame Faith was connected. But she was not alone. Damilola helped the children stand, but before she could leave, the door slammed shut behind her. Her whole body froze. A shadow moved across the wall, and a deep voice spoke from the darkness. You really should have minded your business. Damilola turned slowly. The man from the motorcycle stood there, helmet off now, and his face was rough, cold, smiling in a way that made her skin crawl. You're brave, he said, but bravery can be very expensive. Damilola stepped in front of the children. You won't touch them, she said firmly. He laughed softly. You think this ends with Madame Faith? He asked. She's just one door in a very long hallway. Her chest tightened. What hallway? She demanded. The man took one step closer. You ask too many questions. Outside, thunder rumbled again. The sky darkened quickly. The children clung to Damilola's clothes. The man reached into his pocket. Not fast, not rushed. Calm. Like someone who was used to control, and Damilola realized something terrifying. She had walked straight into the center of the darkness, and this time there was no crowd, no villagers, no witnesses, just her. 2 weak children, and a man who had nothing to lose. The man smiled wider. Let's see how much you really want the truth, he said. And he stepped forward. The man stepped forward slowly. The door behind him was shut tight. The sky outside growled with thunder. Damilola could feel the children shaking behind her, but she did not move. You won't scare me, she said, even though her heart was beating so loud it felt like the whole building could hear it. The man smiled. Scare you? He said calmly. I don't need to scare you. I just need you quiet. His hand came out of his pocket. It was not a knife, not a gun. It was a phone. He held it up and pressed something. A loud ringtone filled the dusty room. Damilola's phone vibrated in her hand at the same time. Her breath caught. He had called her. You see, he said softly, we've been close to you since the day you entered this village. The children clung tighter to her wrapper. You're hurting them, Damilola said firmly. For what? Money? The man's eyes flickered. For balance, he replied. Balance of what? He looked at her like she had asked a foolish question. You think children disappear for no reason? You think Madame Faith woke up one day and decided to lock them up? He tilted his head. Pain needs company. The words were twisted, cold. You used her, Damilola said. The man did not deny it. She was already broken, he replied. All I did was give her purpose. The sentence hit like a slap. Purpose? Locking children away? That was not purpose. That was evil dressed in soft clothes. Thunder cracked loudly outside. For one small second, the man turned his head toward the sound. That was all Damilola needed. She grabbed a wooden stick from the floor and swung it hard at his arm. He shouted in pain. The phone fell. The children screamed. Run, she yelled. She pushed the children toward the side window. The glass was cracked and weak. She kicked it once, twice. It shattered. Go, she shouted again. The children scrambled out into the rain. The man grabbed her shoulder roughly. You foolish girl, he growled. She twisted free and ran toward the broken window too. He reached for her again, but suddenly voices filled the air. Damilola! It was Baba Sadiq, and behind him were several villagers. They had followed the narrow path after noticing she had not returned. The man froze. His eyes darted toward the door. Too many witnesses now. I'd too many eyes. He pushed Damilola aside and ran out the back. The villagers tried to chase him, but the rain made the ground slippery. Within seconds, he vanished into the thick trees. Gone. Again. But this time the children were safe. The rescued children were carried back to the village. Parents cried again, but this time in relief. 5 children had been found, but the fear in Damilola's chest had not left. Because of what the man said. She's just one door in a very long hallway. That meant others were involved, maybe not in Oke-Oba, maybe beyond it. That night the village gathered again, this time under the large mango tree. Madame Faith was brought out. Her hands were tied loosely. She looked smaller now, not proud, not strong, just tired. Damilola stood in front of her. The children said the man brought them here, she said. Madame Faith lowered her eyes. I never meant to hurt them, she whispered. You locked them, Baba Sadiq said angrily. Madame Faith shook her head slowly. He told me they would be taken away from bad homes, she said weakly. He said he would place them somewhere better. Better? Mama Precious cried. In darkness. Tears rolled down Madame Faith's face. He promised me, she whispered. He promised me I would not feel empty anymore. The villagers stared at her. You knew what was happening, Damilola said softly. Madame Faith nodded slowly. I told myself I was helping, she said, but every time a child cried at night, I knew I was lying to myself. Silence spread. The rain had stopped completely. Even the wind felt still. Where does he take them? Damilola asked. Madame Faith hesitated. Her lips trembled. There is a truck, she said finally. It comes once every 2 months. Gasps filled the air. Where does it go? Damilola pressed. Madame Faith looked at the ground. I don't know exactly. He never told me. But he once said, Lagos. The word dropped heavy. Lagos was far, big, busy, easy to hide in. Damilola's heart tightened. That meant this was bigger than just one village, much bigger. That night, after everyone went home, Damilola couldn't sleep. She sat inside the small guest room she was staying in. The ceiling fan turned slowly above her. She replayed everything in her mind. The helmet man, the messages, the hallway comment, the truck. Suddenly, something clicked. She rushed back to the restaurant alone. The building was quiet now, dark. She used her phone light and searched carefully. Under the counter where Madame Faith used to stand, she found a small notebook. Hidden. Dusty. She opened it. Her breath stopped. Inside were names, children's names, with dates beside them. And next to some names, a check mark. Next to others, an X. Her hands shook. The check marks matched the children they had rescued, but the X marks. There were three. Three names. One of them belonged to a child who disappeared over 3 months ago. The truck had already come since then. That meant those children were no longer in the village, and maybe not in Nigeria at all. Her chest felt tight. This was not just kidnapping, this was trafficking. She swallowed hard. And then she heard a soft sound behind her. The restaurant door creaked open. She turned quickly. It was Mama Precious. Her eyes were red from crying. "I couldn't sleep," Mama Precious whispered. "I came to pray here." Damilola hesitated. Then she showed her the notebook. Mama Precious's face drained of color. "Those X marks," she whispered. "Yes," Damilola replied softly. Mama Precious covered her mouth. "My words," she cried. "The day I mocked her, I broke something inside her." Damilola shook her head gently. "No," she said, "your words hurt her. But she chose her actions." Mama Precious fell to her knees. "I was jealous of her kindness," she admitted. "I didn't know she was already drowning." The room felt heavy with guilt and truth, but Damilola knew one thing clearly. The hallway was real, and Okeoba was only one door. She closed the notebook slowly, and just as she slipped it into her bag, her phone rang again. Unknown number. She stared at it, then answered. A calm voice spoke. "You think you're saving them," the voice said, "but you just opened the door wider." The line went dead. Damilola's hands turned cold, because that voice, it was not the helmet man, it was someone else, someone older, someone in control, and that meant the real head of the hallway was still hidden. If this story touched you, don't scroll away. Drop your city and country. What lesson did it teach you? Like, share, and subscribe for more powerful African stories.